industry as a whole has experienced its challenges over the last couple of years, but the U.S. supply chain for bulk grain and feed has proven to be as reliable and as strong as ever. It is due to an underlying story of logistics, people, and the natural disposition of the United States that has allowed us to push ahead. Any telling of this story has to begin in the heart of the United States, where corn, soybeans, and wheat stretch for kilometers in every direction. The United States certainly has no shortage of arable land. Corn and soybeans alone are planted on as much land as there is in the entire countries of Vietnam and Germany. There are stable weather patterns within this land and overall conditions that have fostered incredible productivity in bushels per acre. But it is the people and the capital that ultimately make something of that land. Farmers make up only 1% of the United States population, but produce approximately 25% of the world's food supply. One big factor is the uniquely capitalistic nature of farming in the U.S. Farmers are supported by large, capable, and even intelligent machinery throughout the industry. Combines harvest fields utilizing GPS and algorithms of efficiency, while simultaneously processing the grain. Networks of trucks stand by to swap out once a full load has been received, and they make deliveries to local silos, rail terminals, and river terminals, depending on the geography of the area. Of course, for grain destined for export, those local silos and rail terminals will mostly deliver to river-based terminals. And it is these river-based terminals that play the biggest role in bringing grain to export, as they transition the grain from land to water. By nothing more than good fortune, the large mass of arable land in the U.S. is overlapped entirely by one of the most reliable, navigable river systems in the world. History has proven, whether it be the Romans or the Sui dynasty, that industry is most efficient when supported by transportation over water, and the United States has plenty of it. The Mississippi River system connects half the country with 5 different branching river systems, all funneling down to the mouth of the Gulf. That is where the vast majority of U.S. bulk grain is exported, with the balance mainly accounted for by the PNW and Texas, which are mainly serviced by rail. Though truck and rail do factor into the overall volume of delivery from origin to export, barge transport has an economy of scale that makes it tough to compete against. A network of over 12,000 barges sit on the inner waterways of the Mississippi River system, each carrying an average of 1,500 metric tons of cargo. To give a comparison, it would take over 2,000 trucks to load one Panamax vessel, whereas it would only take 35 to 40 barges. At any given time, there is the equivalent of 50,000 rail cars worth of grain held in barges in the export region of the Gulf. It is this immense network of barges that are most responsible for linking river terminals in the farmland with the export terminals in the U.S. Gulf region. The dimensions of the lower Mississippi River allow for a perfect meeting of this network of barges with the vessels they will load to. The depth of the river allows Panamax-sized vessels to transit upriver to over 230 miles worth of protected ports. The width of the river allows plenty of space for not only navigation and limited traffic congestion, but also for the fleeting space of barges along the banks of the river and the protected anchorages for the vessels. Though certain weather patterns can raise and lower the river level, the disruptions have been infrequent, relatively short-lived, and manageable when they do occur. The Mississippi River is one of the few industrial rivers that does not require extensive dredging to maintain navigable water. This river system is the grain corridor superhighway to bulk exports and will continue to provide stability and advantage to U.S. grain in the future. Ultimately, grain and feed reaching the Gulf region will end up unloading at one of the 10 land-based elevators, 30 bucket cranes, or 3 floating rigs. The quickest of terminals can load Panamax-sized vessels in 24 hours or less, but most can still do it in 48 hours. Grain houses, stevedores, barge lines, ship pilots, vessel owners, independent surveyors, fumigators, freight forwarders, and more all come together in port to get vessels loaded and on their way. Day in, day out, 365 days a year. The basis of this process goes like this. Grain barges that transit downriver arrive in port to a barge fleet and wait to be unloaded at an export terminal. Once unloaded, the grain is brought into house storage, which can hold as much as 40 to 70,000 metric tons of grain. When it is time to load the vessel, the loading terminals will transfer the cargo into temporary shipping bins, at which point the cargo will be weighed by certified scales. Here, the cargo will also be sampled and graded by the government before the cargo reaches the spouts that load it into the vessel holds. Sampling and official grades are all executed by the government, but samples also find themselves within first-class independent laboratories for analytical testing after completion of loading. Certification of this analytical testing also fulfills one part of the full freight forwarding, which transfers ownership from seller to buyer. Feeds have a similar process, but many shippers skip in-house storage. In place of this storage, shippers utilize rigs that unload barges directly to the ship by clamshell bucket transfer. In the case of loading feeds, independent surveyors fulfill the role of weights, sampling, and quality control instead of the government. Now, this system of execution from farm to export terminal has been perfected over the years, but the world is ever changing. New technologies continue to develop, and humans will always pursue the idea of finding a better way. The United States has the flexibility, the strength, and the people to continue to supply the world with food under this environment. One of the best proofs of such can be seen in the recent calamities that arose these past 2 years. These stress tests reveal how reliable this system can be in the face of adversity. COVID, Hurricane Ida, and the U.S. labor shortages have all affected the industry, but production has not wavered. During COVID, companies across the U.S. took various measures to keep employees safe without hindering operations. They wore masks, they distanced, they split up personnel, and moved towards remote work when possible. 3 years ago, video conferencing and remote work were infrequent, but now even conservative adapters are exploring the possibilities of this greater flexibility. For the Gulf region specifically, not only did they face COVID, but they were also affected by one of the strongest hurricanes to ever hit the United States in Hurricane Ida. Of the 4,000 barges in port during landfall, 2,000 of them were affected, with some even being sunk or grounded on the riverbank. Loading terminals were affected as well, with some even suffering severe damage. It was a catastrophe that hadn't been experienced by anyone alive within the industry, yet the exports out of the Gulf were only affected for a brief time. You may see a trend here, and it's one where the United States and the industry continue to rise to the challenge to adapt and persevere. Grain and feed will continue to move thanks to the logistics within the supply chain, the strength of the river system, the people involved, and the geographical makeup of the United States. Projections show that grain and feed demand will only increase as population dynamics and diets change, and the U.S. will be at the forefront with an export market that is strong and reliable well into the future.